The bank fell silent the moment a uniformed police officer stepped forward. Steven Seagal was standing at the counter, calm, almost unreadable. The officer's hand shot out and grabbed the check from Steven's folder. "What's this?" he barked, voice sharp and tense. Phones immediately rose from pockets. A soft murmur ran through the customers, some shocked, others whispering to friends. Cameras hovered mid-air, recording every movement. No one dared speak. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Do you think you can just waltz in here and hand over anything you like?" he demanded. His tone carried authority but also a hint of something else. Nervousness, maybe fear he wasn't willing to admit. Steven didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. His calm presence seemed almost unnatural in the chaotic energy of the bank lobby. A young bank teller froze, pencil hovering over a form. The hum of printers and the distant beep of card machines suddenly seemed louder. Even the security guard shifted his weight, glancing between Steven and the officer. There was a tension that made it hard to breathe. Everyone was watching, some leaning forward, some gripping their phones tightly, all caught in that strange, suspended moment. Steven slowly placed his hand in his pocket, as if nothing had happened. The officer, clearly unsure now, held the check like it might explode at any second. Customers whispered behind him, leaning closer, craning their necks to see what would happen. One woman gasped softly, clutching her handbag. Another man's phone slipped slightly from his grasp before he recovered. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The officer's jaw tightened, and a small bead of sweat ran down his temple. He was supposed to be in control, yet the calm, silent confidence of the man in front of him seemed to quietly tip the scales. A soft cough echoed from the back of the room. Everyone looked up, expecting someone to intervene, but no one did. And then, as if the world had collectively held its breath, Steven finally spoke, not with anger, not with force, but with a calm so deep it made the officer hesitate. "Shall we check the details?" he said, voice low but clear. Phones hovered. Eyes widened. The room seemed to lean forward collectively. "Wait till you see what happens at the end." Because no one in that bank could have predicted the reaction, the shift, or the quiet power that was about to unfold. It was a busy Monday morning in the heart of the city. The Grand State Bank was buzzing quietly, not with chatter, but with the gentle, almost imperceptible rhythms of daily business. The hum of printers filled the air, punctuated by the occasional beep of card machines. Customers queued patiently, glancing at their phones, shifting weight from one foot to the other. Outside, the faint rumble of buses and distant footsteps reminded everyone that life was moving relentlessly onward, but inside, time seemed to slow. Steven Seagal stepped through the glass doors, a folder tucked neatly under his arm. He wore faded jeans, a simple jacket, and an expression of calm that seemed almost impossible in the charged energy of a crowded bank. His movements were measured, deliberate. He didn't hurry. He didn't glance around. He simply walked to the counter, each step precise, as though he were aware that every eye in the room would follow him. And they did. Manager Clark was behind the counter, adjusting his tie and smoothing out the creases of his crisp shirt. He noticed Steven immediately and felt a flicker of annoyance, perhaps even suspicion. Clark prided himself on authority and control. He enjoyed the subtle thrill of power over others. He strode through the lobby, glancing at tellers, flashing his gold watch, reminding everyone, including himself, that he mattered. Yet, something about this quiet man approaching the counter made him pause. The security guard shifted his stance, hands resting lightly on the belt of his uniform. He had seen plenty of tense situations before, but there was something different here. It wasn't aggression but an air of absolute calm, a stillness that carried weight. He subtly leaned against the wall, just enough to keep an eye on Steven without appearing overtly watchful. Customers noticed too. A young woman in the queue fiddled nervously with her scarf. An elderly man, cane resting beside him, straightened in his seat, sensing the subtle change in atmosphere. Phones were lifted unconsciously, people ready to record something they felt might be significant, though none could articulate exactly why. The room itself seemed to contract, as if every small movement, the shuffle of papers, a cough, the soft squeak of shoes on polished tiles, was amplified. Steven reached the counter, placing his folder gently on the smooth surface. His fingers lingered momentarily over the edge, almost as if testing the texture. The officer, already tense from the moment he saw Steven approach, took a small step back, gripping the folder nervously. The air was taut, every heartbeat and whispered breath noticeable. Manager Clark stepped closer, clearing his throat. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, voice sharp but calm. There was an edge to it, The unspoken assumption that someone like Steven wouldn't belong in this place without prior notice. Steven's eyes met his briefly, steady and unwavering. No hint of irritation, no sign of challenge, just a quiet, measured patience that seemed to make Clark's confident posture falter ever so slightly. A faint rustle came from the back office, papers sliding as a teller prepared to check some details. Phones hovered mid-air, cameras tilted, capturing subtle movements. A flicker of an eyebrow, the slight tilt of Steven's head, the clench of the officer's jaw. Small gestures, almost invisible to the casual observer, but here, magnified into a drama that no one could look away from. And yet, despite the rising tension, there was no shouting. No one raised their voice. The room's energy was a silent, electric anticipation, held together by the quiet presence of a man who seemed to bend the air around him without lifting a hand. Every eye was drawn to him. Every thought lingered on the question, what will happen next? Even the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade. A bus passed, a distant siren wailed, but inside only the soft hum of the printers, the click of pens and the shuffle of papers remained. It was a perfect, tense calm. A moment stretched just long enough that everyone in that bank could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. The officer's grip on the check tightened. His knuckles whitened and a faint tremor ran along his fingers. He was trained for situations like this, or so he told himself, but the calm in front of him was unnerving. Steven Seagal didn't speak. He didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, observing without urgency. Every movement he made was precise, controlled, almost deliberate in its patience. Customers shifted subtly in their seats, leaning forward as whispers rippled through the room. "Who is he?" a woman asked softly, her voice just above a whisper. Another man murmured, "I've never seen him before." Phones hovered mid-air, ready to capture every flicker of expression, every microgesture that might hint at what would happen next. The hum of printers and soft tapping of keyboards formed an almost hypnotic background rhythm, broken only by the occasional clearing of a throat. Manager Clark's composure began to waver. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs, tried to assert authority with a glance. But Steven's presence seemed to quietly erode it. Each subtle movement, Clark's foot tapping, a brief tightening of his jaw, was amplified in the charged silence of the room. It was almost theatrical if anyone had noticed. The officer shifted from one foot to the other, a bead of sweat gliding down his temple. Every instinct screamed at him to act, yet he froze. Steven's hand rested lightly on the folder, a gentle, almost imperceptible motion. It wasn't a threat, but it was deliberate, enough to make the officer hesitate. Customers leaned closer. Phones tilted, zooming in. The young bank teller, who had been nervously scribbling notes, paused mid-action, pencil hovering above the form. Even the security guard, usually stoic and unshakable, seemed to lean ever so slightly forward, a subtle nod to the tension filling the room. The air felt heavy. Every cough, every shuffle of feet, every small movement was magnified. A man cleared his throat, trying to disguise a nervous laugh, but it echoed strangely, drawing every gaze in its direction. Steven didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a shift. His calm was a kind of quiet force that pulled attention without demanding it. The officer's jaw clenched again. He glanced at the other staff, seeking validation, perhaps some unspoken support. But all eyes were on Steven. Phones hovered, capturing the scene in shaky frames. Whispers grew. What's going to happen? Is he dangerous? Does he even work here? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, making the suspense almost unbearable. A subtle shift occurred. The officer's hand twitched slightly, a minor adjustment in posture, and it betrayed his uncertainty. Steven's eyes caught the movement, and for a fleeting second they locked. It was quiet, almost invisible, but in that moment the officer realized he wasn't in control here. Not really. Not yet. The room held its collective breath. Nobody moved, yet everyone felt the tension coil tighter. Phones hovered. Fingers gripped armrests. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a head, a blink, the shift of weight from one foot to another, carried weight. It was a slow, building crescendo of anticipation, a moment stretched deliberately, waiting for a spark, a shift, a release. And then, just when it seemed the tension could stretch no further, a soft cough, barely audible, came from the back of the room. Every head turned slightly, eyes narrowing, heart skipping. Nobody expected what happened next. Phones hovered like tiny surveillance drones, capturing every movement, every flicker of expression. The bank teller froze mid-action, pencil poised above the deposit slip. She swallowed, realizing that this wasn't an ordinary day. Everyone's attention was glued to the interaction at the counter. Even the security guard, usually unmoved by routine chaos, leaned forward slightly, eyes tracking Steven Seagal and the officer with quiet intensity. A low murmur began to spread through the room. Whispers multiplied, overlapping like threads weaving tension into the atmosphere. "Who is he?" a customer asked under his breath. "I've never seen him before," another replied. Heads turned subtly, shifting in almost imperceptible choreography as the collective gaze locked onto the scene unfolding at the front. Every subtle gesture, the officer's slight shift in weight, the twitch of a finger, Steven's calm, measured stance, was magnified by hundreds of pairs of eyes. Phones tilted, zoomed, recorded, and paused, each person capturing a personal version of the suspense. A young man in the queue adjusted the camera on his phone, leaning forward slightly to make sure he didn't miss a single detail. A woman further back clasped her handbag tighter, almost as if holding it would somehow anchor her in the storm of tension. The collective attention was electric. Everyone in that bank was silently agreeing. Something important, something unusual was happening, and they were all witnesses. Manager Clark's usual composure faltered further. He straightened his tie once, twice, trying to assert authority with a gesture that now seemed futile. He cleared his throat, and yet the silence swallowed the sound. His eyes darted between Steven and the officer, searching for some signal, some confirmation of control, but the calm aura surrounding Steven seemed to quietly undermine any attempt at dominance. He was like a still pond in the middle of a storm, absorbing energy, not reflecting it. Even the subtle ambient sounds of the bank, the hum of printers, the soft squeak of a chair, the shuffle of papers, seemed louder, magnified by the collective focus. Every cough, every click of a pen, every scratch of a notepad became part of the tension. The air was thick enough to feel, yet no one moved. Every glance, every micro-expression mattered. A tiny tilt of the head, a subtle furrow of the brow, a careful adjustment of posture, all became signals in this silent drama. The officer's jaw clenched, then relaxed briefly, a twitch betraying his uncertainty. He looked at Steven again, but this time his eyes flickered with recognition, or was it hesitation? Customers leaned forward, whispering softly, their voices a low current under the room's tense atmosphere. A small group in the back exchanged puzzled glances, silently asking each other, "What is he waiting for? What will happen next?" Phones recorded, but the people themselves were equally attentive, caught in that rare moment when life feels cinematic, when ordinary reality becomes charged with significance. A child in the lobby tugged at their mother's coat, sensing something unusual, while the mother hushed them gently, her eyes glued to the scene. Even strangers felt connected, participants in a shared experience, their curiosity, anxiety, and attention now bound together. This was no ordinary bank visit. It was theater, but unscripted, unpredictable, and completely real. The collective gaze magnified every detail, every micro-expression, every tiny movement. And then the officer shifted ever so slightly, a minor gesture that seemed meaningless in isolation but, under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes, became monumental. Steven's steady gaze met his briefly, calm and unshaken, almost as if the weight of hundreds of observers added gravity to the moment. Phones hovered closer, fingers tightened, whispers stilled, and the bank seemed to exist in suspended time. Everyone's attention was unified. They didn't know what would happen next, but they knew it would be something worth remembering. The shared energy of anticipation was palpable. Every person in the bank, from the tellers to the customers to the guards, was participating in the drama, each silently acknowledging that this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a moment that mattered. And just when it seemed the collective focus had reached its peak, a subtle shift, the officer's slight hesitation, hinted at the coming change. Nobody moved, but everyone felt it. Phones continued recording, hands hovered, and eyes widened. The room was alive with quiet anticipation. The tension had become almost tangible, a shared pulse that tied everyone in the bank together. Nobody knew what would happen next, but the stage was perfectly set, and the audience, every single person in that bank, was waiting, holding their breath, eyes locked, ready for the moment that would finally break the silence. The officer froze as his eyes flicked to the computer screen behind the counter. A small beep confirmed what he had failed to notice in his initial rush. The check wasn't fake. It was legitimate. Every detail, the account numbers, the signatures, the approval code, was perfectly valid. His shoulders, once rigid with authority, slumped slightly, and for the first time he looked uncertain, almost embarrassed. Steven Seagal didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't make a gesture of triumph. He simply stood there, calm, composed, unshaken. There was no anger, no vindication in his expression. Only patience, as though the world itself had slowed and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. The quiet power in his stance made it impossible for anyone in the bank to remain tense. Even the air seemed to shift, lighter now, almost exhaling after the buildup of suspense. Manager Clark's eyes widened. He adjusted his tie, his carefully curated posture faltering. The arrogance he carried into the room, an authority built on intimidation, was quietly dismantled by the simple truth. His voice, once sharp, now faltered. I see, he stammered, barely above a whisper. There was no confrontation, no loud apology, only a subtle acknowledgement of error. Customers exhaled softly, the collective tension dissipating in waves. Whispers turned into quiet murmurs of amazement. Phones, still hovering mid-air, began to lower. A few captured the entire reveal, but most of the people in the room were watching, fully present, appreciating the calm manner in which the situation resolved itself. There were no dramatic outbursts, no shouting, no chaos, only the quiet, undeniable respect that came from witnessing composure and integrity. The officer, still holding the check, slowly extended it back towards Steven. There was a subtle nod in the officer's eyes, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. Respect, unspoken but understood. The gesture was simple yet weighty, acknowledging that the man in front of him had won not by force or loud argument, but by presence, patience, and quiet confidence. Steven finally took the check, his fingers brushing lightly over the edge as if it were nothing more than a formality. "Thank you," he said softly, voice even and calm. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement, measured, simple, and composed. The room seemed to exhale collectively, as if they had all been holding their breath for too long. Manager Clark straightened slowly, a faint nod escaping him. The tension had left his shoulders, replaced with a grudging understanding. The bank staff returned to their work, quietly but noticeably inspired. There was no shouting, no dramatic relief, just a calm, shared sense that something extraordinary had quietly passed before them. Even the security guard relaxed, leaning back against the wall, eyes still on Steven, acknowledging the shift in energy that had taken place. Customers began to murmur, softly discussing what had just happened. "Did you see how calm he was?" one whispered. "Absolutely remarkable," another replied. It wasn't just the resolution itself, it was the manner in which it had been handled. No chaos, no panic, only quiet strength. Phones slowly went back into pockets, but the feeling lingered. Everyone had witnessed something memorable, something that didn't need dramatics to impress. Even the smallest gestures carried weight now. A slight bow of the head, a blink of understanding, the almost imperceptible release of tension in a hand. These small details mattered more than any shouting or spectacle. They told the story of respect earned quietly, without theatrics, and it resonated with everyone present. Steven turned, gently placing the folder under his arm. His calm presence filled the room one last time. No one dared speak for a moment. The energy, once tense and electric, softened into a quiet admiration. Every eye followed him as he walked toward the door, a man unshaken by conflict, unhurried, measured, completely in control of the moment. The officer exhaled, leaning slightly against the counter. Manager Clark adjusted his tie again, a little more humbly this time. The customers whispered among themselves, processing what they had witnessed. Phones captured images, videos, and snippets of dialogue, but the real memory was in the atmosphere, the quiet, undeniable impact of calm strength prevailing over tension. The lesson, unspoken but clear, was simple. Power is not always loud, and authority is not always shown through aggression. Sometimes, it is measured, patient, and composed. And in that quiet, fleeting moment at the Grand State Bank, every single person learned it firsthand. The moment in the bank lingered in everyone's minds, even after Steven Seagal had left. People returned to their routines, but the memory of what they had witnessed didn't fade so quickly. It wasn't the check, the confrontation, or the officer's moment of hesitation that left an impact. It was the quiet strength, the composure, and the patience displayed by a single individual in the midst of tension. That lesson, subtle yet powerful, stayed with them. Strength isn't always measured in volume, in force, or in the ability to dominate a situation. Sometimes, it is measured in restraint, in the quiet patience that allows a moment to unfold fully before reacting. It is the calm that doesn't need an audience to validate itself, the confidence that doesn't demand attention, the presence that fills a room not by shouting, but by being completely grounded. In life, this kind of strength is rare. Yet, It is the one that earns respect quietly, consistently, and with lasting effect. Think of everyday situations where this applies. At work, a colleague may try to intimidate or challenge you. In a meeting, a debate may escalate, with voices rising and tempers flaring. But reacting impulsively often escalates the problem. Instead, staying calm, measuring your words, and choosing actions deliberately can shift the dynamic. Others notice, even if silently, and respect is often earned without conflict. The people in the bank had witnessed exactly this principle in action. They saw that patience and composure could command authority more powerfully than aggression ever could. At home, too, the lesson resonates. Arguments with family, misunderstandings with friends, or conflicts with neighbors can often spiral quickly when emotions take over. But if you pause, breathe, and respond with calm consideration, the tension dissipates naturally. The quiet presence communicates confidence and respect, sometimes more than any loud argument could. Children notice it, adults notice it, and even strangers can sense it. Strength, after all, is as much about how you carry yourself internally as it is about any outward action. The bank scene also highlights another critical lesson: observation matters. Steven didn't need to rush, push, or argue. He observed the tension, assessed the situation, and acted deliberately at the right moment. In our own lives, taking a step back, assessing, and acting mindfully often produces better results than reacting immediately. Patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. Composure isn't indifference, it's a tool for influence and respect. Consider the people who watched. They leaned forward, phones ready, but they were also learning, quietly internalizing what had unfolded. They felt the subtle shift when authority, calm, and presence aligned. In real life, we are constantly in similar situations. Moments of stress, confrontation, or uncertainty. How we respond defines not only the outcome but also how others perceive us. Quiet strength often leaves a deeper impression than loud, immediate reactions. It's also about timing. Knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to remain still is a skill often underestimated. In the bank, the tension reached its peak because no one moved prematurely. Steven's calm presence allowed the officer to realize the truth on his own, without embarrassment or force. In our lives, timing can be the difference between conflict and resolution, between respect gained or lost. Finally, this story reminds us that composure is contagious. Just as the bank staff, customers, and even the officer were influenced by Steven's calm, our actions can subtly influence those around us. Remaining composed under pressure doesn't just resolve situations. It teaches others, inspires them, and sets a standard for behavior that reverberates quietly but powerfully. In the end, the quiet strength observed in the bank is something everyone can apply in daily life. At work, at home, with strangers, or in stressful situations, remaining patient, composed, and deliberate fosters respect, reduces tension, and creates space for thoughtful action. Strength isn't always loud, and authority isn't always visible. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from simply standing still, observing, and choosing the right moment to act. Next time you find yourself in a high-pressure situation, pause and reflect. How can calm patience influence the outcome? How can observation, timing, and quiet confidence change the energy in the room? Sometimes the answer is not in force or reaction but in stillness. Just like in that bank, quiet strength often speaks louder than words ever could. What would you do if you were standing in that same bank, watching everything unfold as Steven Seagal did? Imagine yourself in that quiet, tense moment. Phones raised, whispers echoing, every eye in the room fixed on the two figures at the counter. Would you remain calm like Steven? Or would your instincts push you to act, to react, to speak, to intervene? Take a moment to reflect on that. Think about the pressure, the expectations, the authority pressing down on you, and consider how your response could shape the outcome. Some people naturally react immediately. They raise their voices, assert themselves, or attempt to control the situation through force or argument. Others, like Steven, wait. They observe, they assess, and they choose the right moment to act deliberately. Both approaches can be effective in different contexts, but what makes a moment truly remarkable is the difference between reaction and intention. In the story we just explored, the calm, patient choice created a ripple effect. It commanded respect, it diffused tension, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. Pause and ask yourself, how often do we underestimate the power of calm? In daily life, whether at work, school, or home, we are constantly faced with situations that test our patience, our resolve, and our composure. Sometimes a colleague challenges us, a stranger provokes us, or circumstances push us to the edge. And yet, the strongest responses are often the quietest. Strength is not always measured in loud words or dramatic gestures. Sometimes the most powerful influence is the ability to remain grounded, deliberate, and unshaken, even when chaos threatens to overwhelm. Now, think about observation. Steven didn't need to raise his voice or make a dramatic display. He simply assessed the room, the people, the subtle energy of tension, and then acted at the precise moment. How often do we act without pausing to observe first? How often do we jump into a situation without understanding the dynamics at play? Observation is a skill and patience is a tool. Together, they create influence without the need for aggression. It's a lesson not only for confrontations but for life itself. Next, consider timing. In the bank, timing was everything. A premature reaction could have escalated tension, perhaps unnecessarily. But waiting for the right moment allowed the officer to realize the truth on his own, without embarrassment or conflict. In your own life, timing can make all the difference. Whether negotiating a deal, resolving a conflict with a friend, or managing a delicate situation at work, the right timing, combined with patience, can turn potential chaos into resolution and misunderstanding into respect. Reflection is another key element. In that quiet, tension-filled bank, every person in the room learned, consciously or unconsciously, a lesson about composure and respect. You, as a viewer, have the opportunity to reflect on this story as well. What would you take from it? Perhaps it's the reminder that patience is underrated, that quiet confidence carries weight, that respect is earned through calm action rather than loud proclamation. Maybe it's the understanding that your presence, how you carry yourself, can influence those around you more than words ever could. And then there's social influence. The people in the bank were not just passive witnesses. They were participants in the energy of the moment. Their attention, their reactions, their anticipation all contributed to the atmosphere. In real life, your own behavior can influence those around you. When you remain calm under pressure, others often follow suit, consciously or subconsciously. You set a standard, a quiet tone, a ripple effect that extends beyond your immediate actions. Now let's make this practical. Take a real-life scenario where you felt tension or pressure. Perhaps it was a meeting where tempers flared, a situation at home where emotions were high, or a moment in public where someone challenged you. Ask yourself, what would Steven do? Would you react impulsively or would you pause, observe, and choose your moment? How could your calm influence the outcome? Reflecting on these questions strengthens not only your decision-making but also your ability to influence and inspire quietly. And here's the engagement part. I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in that bank? How do you handle tense situations in your own life? Comment below with a single word that describes your approach. For example, if you believe in patience and composure, type respect. If you believe in immediate action, type action. If you try to observe before responding, type observe. Your comment doesn't have to be long, just one word to start the conversation. Finally, let's consider the bigger picture. Life is full of moments like the one in the bank. Moments where we are tested, moments where our patience and composure are challenged, moments where we can choose to influence through calm rather than chaos. And in those moments, small decisions matter. One measured step, one deliberate pause, one quiet gesture of confidence can change the entire dynamic. You don't need an audience. You don't need drama. You just need presence. So I challenge you. Next time you face a tense situation, pause and reflect. Observe the dynamics, measure your response, and act with intention. Notice how others react and how your calm presence subtly shifts the energy. Remember the lesson from the bank. Strength is quiet, patience is powerful, and influence comes from composure. If this story made you think, if it inspired you to reflect on how you respond under pressure, comment below with your word. Share this video with someone who could use a reminder about patience and quiet strength. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that teach real-life lessons through suspense, observation, and calm action. Your quiet engagement can ripple outward, just as composure ripples through tension-filled moments in real life.